I'm here outside St Clement's Church in North Kensington, just under the shadow of Grenfell Tower. As we look back on the last few months, these are days we will remember for the rest of our lives. They've led us through experiences few of us ever imagined. Phrases like lockdown, social distancing, contact tracing and the R number, things we'd never heard of 6 months ago are now common currency. As we reflect on these past days, what have we learnt? Well, hopefully many things, but let me just focus on a few. What happened during lockdown was something quite extraordinary. In our society, we make a great deal of personal autonomy, the rights of the individual to choose our own way of life. The idea that each of us should be free to pursue our own ambitions, to do as we like as long as we don't infringe the rights of others, it's part of the bedrock of liberal democracies like ours. And yet we're aware that that can come at a cost. Our emphasis on personal, individual freedom can lead to tensions between different visions of the good, or even to a consumerism that can threaten the sustainability of the planet on which we live and depend. When the lockdown was announced in March, however, we moved very quickly to a very different way of life. We all chose to curb our own rights, our individual freedom to go to pubs and restaurants, to watch live sport, to shake hands, to travel to work, to serve instead the common good, to care for our neighbours. Then there was the volunteering. When the virus hit, 10 million people are said to have volunteered in some way by taking food to elderly people in the neighbourhood, helping at a food bank, or doing the shopping, or for neighbours, or getting prescriptions at the chemist. It was like what we saw here at Grenfell Tower in the days after the fire 3 years ago, when there was a similar outpouring of compassion and generosity from people all over the country wanting to help. We learned that for a society to function well and to ward off the threats that confront it, individual choice on its own is not enough. A society cannot survive the threats that might undermine it if each one of us pursues our own self-chosen goals independent of everyone else. We have to learn the capacity to sacrifice our own desires for the sake of the wider community. In other words, we've begun to do what our readings said earlier on this breakfast. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, looking not only to your own interests, but each to the interests of the others. That's what we did during lockdown. Now we're beginning to come out of it. The balance is tipping again back towards the expression of individual freedoms, and there may be some value in that. Individual freedoms are important and necessary. And yet maybe this is one of those things that we don't entirely want to go back to normal afterwards. Maybe our learning to put the common good before our individual choices, to restrain our own desires for the good of our neighbour, is something we can hold on to. Maybe we can redress the balance between individual freedoms and the common good a little more in favour of the latter. The problem is, this doesn't always come naturally to us. We want to help for a while, but we lapse back into old habits. That small voice inside of self-preservation, of fear or self-interest often wins out over the impulse to love our neighbours. Because of course lockdown also had a darker side. It brought us face to face with some of the inequalities of our society, as we discovered here at Grenfell. If you lived in crowded accommodation, were elderly, did a job that meant that you couldn't work from home on your laptop, or were from a black or Asian background, you were more likely to suffer from the virus. In recent weeks, the death of George Floyd has shone a particularly stark light on the undercurrent of racism in our society and the need to address the deeper structural ways in which it lurks in our hearts and our institutions. Racism is all about wanting to protect ourselves, a fear of our neighbour who looks different from us. And recent times have held up a mirror to us, and what we have seen is not all good. Some people think the church closed down during the pandemic. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm in Hounslow, which is predicted to be the second hardest hit borough in London, with a 40% drop in economic activity and tens of thousands of jobs at risk because of its close links to the aviation industry. Heathrow is just up the road. For years, this church, St Paul's, has been a vital hub for support for some of the most vulnerable people in the area. running a food bank, offering a drop-in cafe where people can get housing assistance, debt advice, help with mental health issues, meet local police liaison officers and so on. When lockdown started, they ran a social media campaign offering help to the local community. Because they were trusted in this neighbourhood, schools, council departments, housing officers and other agencies started calling, asking if they could refer people in need to the church and support and help in what they were doing. Claire, the vicar here, tells me that for the first month of lockdown, the vicarage phone was ringing pretty much non-stop with food bank inquiries. People in the area who were furloughed or had lost their jobs contacted the church offering to help. And together they provided food for nearly 700 local people every month. They delivered food parcels to those who were unable to come and collect, including those who are homeless, refugees and those escaping domestic abuse and trafficking. And St Paul's was not alone. Churches like this are doing this all over the country. Now, why does this kind of thing tend to spontaneously rise up in churches like this? It is because at the heart of the Christian faith is the story of a God who serves us. Our reading has these remarkable words about Jesus Christ. Being in the very nature God, he did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. It's the story of a God who does not stay in heaven waiting for us to serve him, but enters into our world in the person of Jesus Christ to serve us. We've heard many inspiring stories of people who died of the virus while serving others as nurses, hospital porters. And maybe the reason those stories touch us so deeply is that they're a small echo of the great story at the heart of Christian faith, of a God who loved the world so much that he gave his own Son for us, so that we might know the peace and freedom that comes from being known and loved by the God who made us. This amazing grace, as we will sing in a moment, is a story that's had extraordinary motivating power over the centuries and still does today. It inspires countless people to do that thing that doesn't come naturally to us, to make those large and small sacrifices for the sake of our neighbours and sometimes even our enemies, not just in lockdown, but as a way of life. If you work in Parliament, I hope today is a reminder of the vital work that faith communities play in our society. There are Christian churches in every single community across our country, 40,000 of them, more than the number of pubs in the UK. Smaller ones, larger ones, all dedicated to the worship of God and enabling people like you and me to hear that story of the God who comes to serve us. Each one is a real or potential network of people learning to love and serve their neighbour. And because the church is essentially local, it is an unparalleled network of volunteers that can deliver local support in a way that few other national institutions can. If you're a Christian leader here today, I hope you can hear again this call to tell the story of the God who came to serve us in Jesus Christ. I hope also it inspires you to bear witness to that love by serving the neighbourhood, the town, the village, the suburb where you live. You may be watching this alongside your MP, and my hope is that you can discuss together ways in which you might work together to serve your communities in future. If we're to solve the challenges facing us in the future, what has been called the three pandemics of our time, coronavirus, racism and climate change, we simply can't go back to the simple individualism of before. Maybe the experience of the coronavirus crisis and the amazing grace of the Christian message can teach us a way of living that might just be the saving of us.